The structure was swarming with afflicted constructs going about their duties, and before long Lennox and her rebels found themselves fighting up through the blind spots and gauntlets of the scaffold interior. Meanwhile, heavily armed security forces, drawn from their perimeter posts by the mole's emergence, were running across the assembly yards and converging upon the Titan. The compartments and ladder wells of the towering complex were filled with the cacophony of gunfire. The Omnissian faithful had to make use of whatever untainted weaponry they could scavenge, and could not afford God-pleasing uniformity. Laslocks blasted bolts across the darkness of the decks. Shells from stub carbines tore up through catwalks. Arc rifles threw streams of lightning along gantries. Lennox anticipated the arrival of the rebels by tearing grenades from her bandolier and throwing them up through the ladder wells and into the levels above. The Ajax Abominata, even in the final stages of its dread assembly, was what she had come to expect from a corrupted god machine, swarming with twisted artisans, prattling scrap code and insanity. The rebels moved up at speed, and with merciless gunfire delivered at point-blank range. The corrupted army of constructs tending the monstrous Titan were ill-equipped to repel such a direct attack. The assembly yard's security forces and shock troops hadn't entertained the possibility of an attack on Temple Tarantine coming up through the installation's foundations. While they babbled and ran towards the towering scaffold, Lennox and her rebels hauled themselves up through the structure. Heavy servitors and cyborg corruptions shrieked as they were blasted aside. Chain blades opened up the traitor constructs in a fountain of blood and oil before sending them flailing off the scaffold's edge. The rapid advance was not met without resistance. About them, the very metal of the Titan's outer hull and the surrounding scaffolding warped with demonic presence. Infernal eyes opened in the walls. Hatches opened explosively to vomit acidic ichor or shoot grasping tentacles at the rebels. Deck openings became fang-lined mouths that cut insurgents in half. The fighting got close and tangled on a platform crowded with strapped-down stores and cargo nets. They were rushed by servitors with black filth bubbling from their mouth grills and a fell light behind their eyes. Lennox ordered her expendable ferals with their limb-fused weaponry into the fray, supported by engineered hulks who tore the traitor servitors limb from corrupted limb. Higher up, the rebels became caught in a furious exchange of fire as a twisted member of the Titan crew took charge on the scaffold deck, joined by sentries running up the mobile gantries. The stairwell turned into a horrific kill zone. Lennox didn't have time or bodies to spare in pushing on through, and so cut up through the mesh flooring with her chain blade. Sending a small group up through the hole with Galahac's Zarko, she watched the engine seer swing his power axe about him. With heavy footfalls, he took apart possessed servitors and buried the crackling weapon in the Titan crew member with a sickening thud. With the gauntlet broken, Lennox ordered the rebels onwards and upwards. The compartments about the Titan's command deck had been locked off by the time the rebels reached it. Engineering constructs gargled corruption at them through the metal. "We don't have time for this," Lennox said to Omnex 70 and Zarko. Leveling his arquebus at the doors, Omnex 70 punched round after transuranic round through the bulkhead and into the cavity compartment beyond. As the sound of the tainted constructs died away, the engine seer buried the crackling cog of his axe in one of the round punctured doors and heaved it aside. Lennox slipped through, her plasma caliver hugged in at her chest. The compartment stank of corruption and was wreathed in a lead-colored smoke. There were warped bodies on the floor with gaping holes through their polluted workings where Omnex 70 had shot them through. A tech adept came at the princeps, wielding a heavy multi-tool like a club. Leaning into the kick of the caliver, she blasted the thing into oblivion, before turning to face another filth-spewing construct, burning it from existence. "Open it up," Lennox said to Galahac's Zarko as they strode through the compartment and climbed up onto the outer shell of the Titan's head. From there, they could see many other Titans in the gloom of the colossal assembly yard. They were all in different stages of completion. some surrounded by warped scaffolding. Lennox looked down at the corrupted hull of the Ajax Abominata beneath her boots. The princeps could feel the suffering of the afflicted machine spirit within. "Princeps," Omnex 70 called from the scaffold exterior, his optics whirring through different filters. He pointed out across the assembly yard. "The Ventorum is powering up." Lennox grunted. The warlord titan, Belladon Ventorum, was one of the many god machines waiting in the assembly yard precincts for transportation off-world, and for a long time, judging by its relatively uncorrupted appearance. While most of its weaponry was too powerful to use without damaging the precious Ajax Abominata, its mighty Gatling blaster was capable of turning the scaffolding upon which they stood into a blur of shredded scrap. "Engineer, work fast," she called. "As fast as I can," Zarko replied. While a simple hatch, even a reinforced one, shouldn't have been a problem for a priest of Mars, the corrupted metal sickeningly retracted from Zarko's tools. As he finally forced the grotesque thing open, Omnex 70 pointed his arquebus down into the musty darkness of the bridge space. There was no crew on the command deck, and Lennox didn't have time for the intricacies of sabotaging such a complex machine. All she knew was that the most sophisticated piece of equipment on a Titan was the manifold interface and mind impulse technologies that would link the crew to the machine. Zarko stood aside to let Lennox get past him to the hatch. "Pass them along," the princeps ordered as her rebel followers formed a line. One by one, they passed along the demolition packs they had carried with them. Zarko primed the timers before handing the devices over to Lennox, who dropped them down through the hatch. "Go!" she called, moving the Omnissian faithful off the Titan's afflicted hull and back into the scaffold complex. A mobile gantry completed its ponderous swing into position, connecting with the scaffolding, and Lennox's constructs began exchanging heavy fire with enemy forces running the length of the groaning platform. A tech thrall exploded in gore and workings as the beam of some tainted weapon hit him. Servo automata were blasted to shreds, and gun servitors received glowing auto rounds to the head. "Get back!" Lennox ordered, unleashing a storm of plasma up the ladder well. She felt the metal of the walls about her retract and tremble with fury and pain as the plasma stream burned up through both opening and flooring to turn the deck above into a light storm. The half-bodies of smoldering constructs thudded down on top of them. A demonic artisan screeched at the rebels. "And you, afflicted thing!" Lennox roared back, slapping another tri-flask into her plasma caliver and blasting a response. She felt the metal hand of Omnex 70 on her shoulder. It was time to leave. "Tactical withdrawal!" she ordered, prompting a VAT-engineered work hulk carrying a heavy stubber to stream suppressing fire along the length of the mobile gantry, allowing the rebels time to slide back down through the lower decks. Throwing the caliver across her back on its strap, Lennox clasped the edge of a ladder with the inside of her boots and a loose-gloved grip. Sliding down through the corpse-strewn decks of the Ajax Abominata's rig, she hit the bottom and got out of the way for Omnex 70 and the much larger Zarko. The ground floor was a storm of thin, dark beams and arc streams tearing through the scaffolding from reinforcements closing in from outside. The assembly yards were huge, and it had taken the installation's sentries some time to converge upon the mole and the targeted Titan. The gunfire of dark mechanicum constructs cut through the jabbering scrap code and klaxons shrieking across the assembly yard. As rebels stumbled through the lower level, many were cut down by infernal shock troops closing on their transport. "Ratchek, reverse drill!" Lennox called to the Moderati as she hauled herself up to the scratched hull of the Archimedex. Slapping thralls and limping battle automata in through the mole's hatch, Lennox felt the scaffold's superstructure tremble. The explosives fired. The Ajax Abominata's command deck exploded, blasting the head of the Titan into nothing more than shattered wreckage, raining flaming debris down through the scaffold rig. "Princeps," Omnex 70 said with a cyborg's lack of emotion and urgency, and pulled Lennox towards the waiting mole. She nodded. The mighty Belladon Ventorum was also sending quakes through the assembly yards with its every step, the monstrous titan moving into position. The rebels' work here was done. The Ajax Abominata would be going nowhere without a command deck. With Zarko and Omnek 70 in, Lennox stepped inside the transport and heaved the bulkhead shut. Safe once more below ground, the Archimedex nonetheless rocked with the quaking force of the explosions above as the Belladon Ventorum opened fire upon the scaffolding complex of its sister engine. Climbing down through the mole, Lennox felt the rumble fade as they plowed down through the bedrock to safety. Not even a warlord's terrible weaponry could reach them down here. It was a job well done. She had denied the War Master the Ajax Abominata, saving the countless loyalist lives that the monstrous machines would have claimed. She turned and hit the internal Vox stud. "Ratchek, fire up the new spherics," she said with satisfaction. "Have Invalis Base advised. Mission success. Tell them we're inbound."